Good afternoon. One of my favorite places in the world has always been Thailand. I first went there when I was 17, and I've been there many times since. And just a beautiful place. The sights, the smells, the people were the most important thing. But it always stuck with me. But I have a special memory of a tour guide, my driver, and his name was Bumbui. And Bumbui, like Thai, they love nicknames. Bumbui means chubby. And he was indeed chubby, but it was the quintessential chubbiness in that he was bursting with joy and fun. Like a big pixie. He loved to laugh. And he was a great guy. And having been in Thailand for a while and watched how things were, I noticed that the ethnically Chinese, the Thais of Chinese ethnicity, made up about 20% of the population, but accounted for 70 or 80%, possessed 70-80% of the wealth of the country. Sorry, adjusting my prop. Anyway, and I couldn't help but I just wondered how my friend dealt with this. How do you deal with some have so much and others so little? And he just looked at me and said, "Oh, the big fish eats the little fish." And he just laughed. It made me pause. It made me reflect about, number one, importance in life. What's really important? Bumbui seemed to be having a great time with his little part of the pie. But it made me reflect that humankind, since the caveman days, since we were peering out and listening and looking for what lurked about, friend or foe, to eat or be eaten. Yeah. But I think from the very earliest days, humankind looked for some sense of order, a pecking order, if you will. And the big fish eats the little fish brought up the whole idea of the food chain. And I think this was one of the first attempts to categorize, looking for order out of chaos, trying to categorize things in the sense, in the idea of where we fell in the scheme of things. And the food chain. The food chain, big fish eats the little fish. But we immediately assume the top position. But this was not always so. Historically, there were beings, life forms, stronger, faster, and who we represented, who saw us as prey. And it seems that we became the most efficient at killing. The only species that kills for pleasure rather than necessity. So we assume the top position in the hierarchy of this early food chain hierarchy. Not without some bumps and bruises along the way. But Later, a scientist would come along and try to more efficiently categorize, find the order, looking for order in chaos. That was where'd his name go? His name just disappeared. He's the one that talked about survival. There it comes. Darwin. Charles Darwin, early scientist, Western scientist, who came up with the theory of survival of the fittest. Whoever was enjoyed of the species, whoever enjoyed some characteristic, it could have been a flaw in the beginning, but it developed into something that gave more strength, more intelligence, more camouflage. It made them superior to others of their kind. Hence, they survived. The strong survived. And he looked at nature, that nature, the creatures, seemed to pick for their mate the strongest, the best, the cream of the crop, to mate, to have their progeny from, to assure their place in the hierarchy. I want to talk about somebody who's created a hierarchy in our more recent times. Perhaps it's maybe not as familiar as Charles Darwin, but Maslow. His hierarchy, Maslow's ladder, his hierarchy of human condition, and how humans would progress from one step to the next step to the next step. Basically, a 5-step ladder. And in 1943, when he first started putting this out, this was a work for him, and all the way up until 1987. He didn't change his basic format, but he just made some adjustments to kind of account for popular misunderstanding, perhaps, or maybe him being too pedantic from the very beginning. This happens and this happens and this happens. In the search for order and explanation. The first level, as we probably all know, is the physiological level. The level of feeding the body, providing for the needs of life for human beings. And then next, after you were sure that you could survive, now you needed some sense of security. Security in structure, to live a safe cave, to hide in, to keep dry from the rain. And he saw this as a second hierarchy, the second step. And their third step was grouping together belonging and needs, the forming of a community, looking for kinship, relationships. So take care of the body, protect the body, nurture relationships, get very sophisticated in the hierarchical constructions of society. And after this would come the striving for self-esteem, accomplishments, accumulation of the most cows, the most women, the most money, and ultimately became the power. And the fifth level was what he called self-actualization or self-realization. And he would later in his subsequent studies, at first it seemed like you had to accomplish level 1 100%, and then you go to level 2, and then level 3, and then level 4, and eventually, time permitting, you'd go to the ultimate expression, level 5, self-realization, self-actualization. But he came to see, at first he came to see that, well, maybe we didn't have to do 100%, 100% before that. Actually, you could be working on one. And especially, I think, the shelter and the building of relationships kind of morphed together. The structures of society, more and more sophisticated, the growth of groups, the growth of agriculture, and the growth of staying in one place, the reality of staying in one place to grow crops, which allowed people to get together instead of wandering and chasing after their food, hunter-gatherers. So this kind of happened at the same time. He said, this doesn't have to be, maybe you misunderstood, or maybe I was too enthused with my own structure, that you had to 100%, 100%, 100%. So then he put some flexibility in the structure. Well, maybe indeed you didn't have to go completely. You didn't have to complete one to move on to the next. And then with further sophistication, I think he noticed that it's possible to go backwards. It doesn't have to be only up. At first it seemed like a logical, sequential order of progress. But then you notice that traumatic events, illnesses, physical illnesses, spiritual and emotional challenges, death in the family of a loved one, divorce. Now there's a pretty modern concept. Divorce could be debilitating, in his opinion, in his experience. How someone who could experience divorce could slide all the way back. Maybe they were in the building the self-esteem, building a career, building a livelihood. But divorce just stopped them in their tracks. They were no longer able to perform at work. They were no longer able to provide. If they can't perform at work, they can't provide from themselves. They would slip down into the previous level. They wouldn't be able to sustain their relationships with other people. A myriad of things could happen to a human being in their life that could see them backslide. And he also said that, well, it's not a given that you rise to the top. But I couldn't help but thinking, that's all good and well and good and well. Yeah, I like that. It makes sense. It seems like there has to be some progression, and it seems like it's a pretty good stab at finding order in the chaotic world in which we find ourselves. At least the illusion of order. Because without order, it seems hard to accomplish much. Without rules, that are corollary of order, a consequence of order. Without rules and laws, it's to keep anarchy at bay. Order. Without these things, we would have stayed on level 1 or level 2 at best. But what immediately dawned on me, what became apparent when I looked at this paradigm, when I looked at this hierarchy, it's in the form of a triangle, and the broadest level, it gets narrow as it proceeds to the top, implying probably that fewer and fewer more people fall by the wayside. Most people might get stuck in one or the other, lower ones. So the first thing that when I looked at the 5 categories, it fit in patterns that I've created. The first 4 seem to be concerned with doing, human doings. And they were all about action, things that we needed to do. Take care of our body, find shelter, make friends, and then have a sense of accomplishment or accumulation, power, whatever. To differentiate, to further categorize it, oh, I'm more powerful than him. I'm richer, I'm better looking, I'm smarter, I'm older. Yeah, another hierarchy within the hierarchy. So that was readily apparent that 4 things were all about doing, the first 4 things. Where the being, which was implied with the triangle, instead of why not a square or a rectangle, and implied that everyone would move up through all the levels. No, purposely have a triangle. Reminds me of the food pyramid. You know, at the top you eat it, and you build up from the pyramid. And the pyramid triangle is the strongest geometric structure, isn't it? So he has a pyramid, and that's implying that most of us will be busy doing, and very few of us will get a chance to experience being. So that was the first thing that was apparent to me. All the things that we do what we do what we have to do. Man, he put reasons and categories. Order again. Order in chaos. To make it easier for us to cope, number 1. Because it's pretty hard to function in chaos. It's quite a talent to function well in chaos. So the search for order and the emphasis on doing, 4 steps, and the 5th, somehow the tiny little tip of the pyramid seemed to be the pie in the sky. But what appeared to me, besides the second thing that came up with me, is that the doing and the being is number 1. Number 2 is, for me personally, I have to look through things from a personal lens. It's hard for me to look through your eyes, you know. I have to look through mine. And through my glasses, okay? Yeah. So what seemed to me, what was so for me, was from the very earliest memories I was focused on self-realization, self-actualization, spiritual awakening, understanding, answering the questions of life, the big questions, finding, working, striving to that. And I kind of felt, maybe naively at times, it turned out to be naively at a lot of the time, but I pretty much thought from an early age that if I focused on the end game, the goal, that everything else, the other 4 levels, would kind of fall into place. Well, I had many advantages to start off with. I came from the richest country in the world, and I didn't have to worry about the basic survival. And most times I'd have shelter, and I had a family structure. But the level 4, was never of a big concern. I didn't want to do something. I didn't have a driving aim to do anything, accomplish anything, get some accolades, accumulate material goods. No desire whatsoever. So, grace of birth, I had the first. Most of the time I could do just enough to keep the second. Seemed to me that couldn't avoid the third. Family and structure was all around. 4th seemed of little import. It was focusing on the 5th and ultimate expression. And primary purpose, as far as I was concerned, primary purpose of us here in this life and at this time is to find our way home, back to what we've always known, back to what we find again is of no surprise. It feels familiar, it feels comfortable. Like a good pair of comfortable shoes. A broken in old pair of shoes or a favorite shirt. It just feels familiar. What you've always known, but temporarily suffered from amnesia and forgot, and got misdirected through a whole bunch of that doing stuff, and needed to learn and focus to be. Well, in my experience, in my personal life, like I said in the beginning, it was rather naive of me and not recognizing my privileged position, not taking that into account that the first couple steps were given to me on Maslow's hierarchy. And I didn't really appreciate that. I mean, wasn't even aware of how privileged. I came from a poor family, but nevertheless, I was in the richest country in the world. I was a white male, lots of privilege. I was given a fantastic education by California, elementary and high school, junior high school education for free. And it was top notch in those days. I was fortunate enough, again, privileged and entitled. It took getting divorced. I'm a bit old-fashioned, and I didn't become aware of how old-fashioned I was that when I got married, I thought that was supposed to be forever. My commitment to my marriage was forever. Married as a 27-year-old man. That was my commitment. Well, as we well know, it takes two to have a commitment. And my wife chose not to be with me anymore. I wasn't the right one for her. I didn't fulfill many of her emotional, physical, many of her needs. And she chose to look elsewhere. Well, I was devastated. I couldn't keep my job. I became homeless. I became trapped in the bleakness of being homeless. The biggest obstacle to being homeless, they say, well, get a job. Hey, let's look at Maslow. Shelter. The first thing to fall by the wayside when you're homeless. Actually, I lived in my car. So I had a home on wheels. But no permanent address. By all definitions, homeless. Living in a car. The biggest problem is cleanliness. Getting clean. Cleaning your body. Getting clean clothes. You can't go to a job stinking. You need to have access to a shower. Laundromats, washing machines. You can find washing machines. But where to bathe? Beach parks, mostly, right? At first I belonged to a gym, but I couldn't pay my dues anymore, so I belonged to a gym, and I could use their facility, even go swimming, and use their facility. And then it became the beach park, and cold water all the time. But there becomes a mindset. It's really hard to snap out of it. It's really hard, especially when you're suffering from emotional trauma, as I was, my divorce. And this brought me smack dab down. This is where I said I'd been previously naive. And even though I kept my eyes on my being, my goal, I had to wrestle with actually step 2 and step 3 of Maslow's ladder, or I don't know what to call it a ladder, because it's a pyramid, Maslow's pyramid. I don't know, but I guess the idea was that you climb up, but as I said, he kind of discarded that idea because you can step back down, as in the example that I gave you. And in retrospect, I see all these things so that I could appreciate, number one, that I was in a position of privilege, richest country, white male. I could appreciate things that I had just taken for granted or never even really taken a hard look at. The step-ups, the help that I had compared to those that had to struggle with level 1 and level 2. Level 2 seems to take more effort, security. And the puzzle part of security is that we live in an insecure world. And one of the things that I think women are always looking for is security. But Basically, there's no such thing as security, apparent security. We can lull ourselves to sleep, but the reality is that nothing is secure because you don't know what's happening from moment to moment. I've mentioned before that in level 3, with relationships, I have kind of a checkered. I wasn't always very good at that either, but I had the structure. And I mentioned that the 4th one, I had never had and never will have entertained those ideas for achieving something in terms of physical doing, in terms of pull myself up by my straps, through my individual effort, that I will become the Grand Poobah of Princeville. But always kept that focus in my eye on the end game. Self-actualization, self-realization, waking up to the condition that has always been mine, getting rid of the illusion of separateness, getting rid of the illusion of division, leaving the doings behind on the first 4 levels of the Maslow's pyramid, and embracing the 5th. But it seems to me that once you've accomplished, once you've been successful in being, once you become a successful being and stop doing, there's more steps to the pyramid. There's a responsibility to pass on your experiences, to love unconditionally, to fill yourself with compassion, to show everyone that you come across that it's possible to find peace that can lead to joy. All of these things are maybe the 6th level. Maybe it's the all-seeing eye and the eyes up on top. And I know that once we leave this physical form, this body behind, once we no longer have to incarnate, that there's more steps and more steps. And on the spiral, the never-ending spiral to infinity. So, lots to do, but we need to look back, we need to love, and we need to wish the best for everyone.